Europea. Su intervención va a ser en inglés, pero tendremos un espacio al final para preguntas en español por si hubiera alguna pregunta del público. Gracias.
Good morning, and thank you so much for bearing with me of doing this in English. And it is my very great pleasure having this opportunity addressing you this morning. Minister of Agriculture, representatives of ministries for the environment and for the economy, representatives from the chambers and in particular from the Cámara del Agricultura and from AgExport, representatives of the national chambers supporting this event today. Congratulations of organizing this today, this important event that indeed is at the interface of business, of trade, technology, and sustainability. And I was already intrigued by what we heard in the first interventions this morning, how much we all see the need of acting for our planet, but how much we also see the opportunity that is in that, and for which we then very actively seek the discussion as this morning, but also the conversation about which Charles spoke when he spoke about his travel to Brussels and about the opportunity we had yesterday to see reality in the field, and big thanks for that opportunity. The event today is an excellent opportunity also to exchange ideas, knowledge, and insights between business communities as well as policymakers in Guatemala, in the region, and in the European Union. The discussion today will maybe focus and hopefully focus on a lot of technical detail and how to manage that step forward, the transition, the investing into the traceability, the investing into circularity, bioproducts, agroparks, caring about the soil, about comprehensive management of pests, the tools and strategies for investment into the development of sustainable agriculture on the environmental side as much as on the social side. And for this, I would like to set the scene a bit with bringing to you the trade perspective, the EU perspective. And while it may have been a bit strange to do that in the past, today I should underline sustainability is part and parcel of trade and economic policy making. We cannot do trade without doing sustainability, and we are happy to say and proud to say it is part and parcel of the trade agreement we have between Central America and the European Union, and in particular the interim trade part of the agreement that we had started applying more than 10 years ago. Looking first at the economy, and it has been said before, this agreement has delivered and it continues delivering. It has allowed the Central American countries and the European Union taking our trading relationship to the next level, with trade between the two regions almost fully liberalized. Since the agreement was signed in 2012, total trade has increased by 67%, and Central American exports to the European Union have increased by even 86%. As my political master, the Commission's Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, has said last year, the association agreement has delivered and has done good for both sides. Beyond its clear trade and economic benefits for small and medium-sized companies as well, the agreement has consolidated our relationship based on trust, based on cooperation, and based on dialogue. This cooperation that we have started establishing, including on the topic of trade and sustainable development, serves as a platform to exchange information on best practices. For example, how business models can be developed and improved to encourage sustainable growth and the transition to a greener, to a circular economy with low carbon emissions, with efficient use of resources, but also a just transition with a full role and participation of the social side of it. This is what we're here discussing today. And this is also what is particularly relevant from trade and sustainability. So, sustainability has to be and is a full part of anything we do on trade. And so you see me today coming from DG Trade talking about sustainability. As you know, the trade pillar of the agreement includes a chapter on trade and sustainable development. So we cover the economic, but also we cover the environmental, the climate, and the social dimension of our relations. We have taken binding commitments in our chapter. Very importantly, and I start with that before turning to the environmental and climate side, we have taken commitments to respect, to promote, and to realize the fundamental rights at work in our relations. Here we refer to the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and we talk about freedom of association, we talk about the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, we talk about the elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor, we talk about the effective elimination of child labor, and we talk about the elimination of discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. And since June last year, when the ILO has made occupational safety and health its fifth fundamental principle, we are also expected and we are committed to also talking about occupational safety and health in our relations. And so we also noted with great interest in our field visits yesterday the initiatives by individual companies that are already there taking up these things. When we look at these commitments, we also look at an ex post evaluation, as we normally do as European Union, of our agreements, which shows that in many areas there is positive development on workers' rights and working conditions, that the agreement has proven its worth of giving us a platform to engage and to talk, and to make sure and to focus on keeping all of us in step and in line with those fundamental ILO core conventions and fundamental rights. For example, the report pointed out how progress has been made on effective steps to eliminate child labor. And so we see that the situation may vary greatly between countries and between sectors. And we also see that these observations from the ILO monitoring body suggest that there is scope for more work going forward on the legislative side, on the implementation and enforcement of domestic legislation. And I think that is work we want to engage with you actively, and also see that as much as everything else as a true opportunity. For example, in the conditions for free trade union establishment and operation in practice, like in the involvement in tripartite bodies. Now, the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter of our agreement also has commitments, and that takes me to the second part of our chapter, in effectively implementing the multilateral environmental agreements in what we do, in our laws, in our practice. And that is something we all collectively, as Central American countries, as Guatemala, here the host, as European Union, we are already committed to in those international agreements. I name just a few of them: the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Paris Agreement in particular, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species in Wild Fauna and Flora, and the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, just to name a few. I think broadly most of the EU partners on trade have ratified about 11 such conventions. The EU has ratified 34. We're looking at those that each party has ratified and that we commit to effectively implement. And also for that, the agreement that we have, the chapter on sustainable development that we have, the dialogues that we have formally every year and ad hoc like this week here in Guatemala offer a unique platform to address gaps we see, challenges we see, but also opportunities for working together. That was also something very important. The speakers opening this conference today have mentioned that cooperation and how important it is. And there, also, the chapter can offer us more talking points to include. For example, looking beyond the sustainability commitments as such, but at the opportunities, the possibilities that they create for trade and foreign investment in environmental technologies or in services supporting those technologies. The renewable energy that is there, the possibilities we have for energy efficient products and investment and services. That is where trade can be bringing its greatest contribution to sustainability. Now, that would also include, and we have a specific article on that in our chapter, it would also include trade in schemes like fair and ethical trade, eco-labeling, organic production. Minister, you mentioned that. We have seen in our conversation how much interest there is in the exporting side in the Central American countries, but also how much interest there is in this discussion with our colleagues coming from the European Commission DG Agriculture. So there's a broad scope for an interesting and a productive conversation. And today's conference shows how these things can be made more practical. And in what we see, what we understand, what seems to be going on is already a silent revolution, as it has been documented in the ex post evaluation report, which shows how much there is ongoing already in the Central American countries, in Guatemala, in strengthening sustainability, notably and not least in the agricultural sectors and in agricultural exports. And to support those efforts and to support the implementation, we also heard already from Sieka about the projects that are so important. We heard from my colleague here from the delegation about those projects. Indeed, there is a wide range of projects that is ongoing, and for which we see the Central American countries, Guatemala, as key partners to implement. For instance, I would mention two other projects. One is a 5-year program to support decent work, with 15 million euros in it. And the other one is a contribution agreement where we are supporting the state of Guatemala in the implementation of commitments under the ILO roadmap on freedom of association and collective bargaining. That is important work and important projects. But we also implementing important flagship initiatives like on fostering green transition. And as we are here in Guatemala, let me take that example from Petén, where we're doing this project, or we have a project reducing inequalities through inclusive economic development. You know, these specific programs are complemented by region-to-region programs, such as on digital transformation, that we know will be an important enabler for doing what we want to do, and on circular economy. So we talked about our agreement, we talked about how we need to see the opportunity that is there, the need to discuss, the need to work together. And I'm now adding another element to that, and that is legislation, standards that's coming out of the European Union, but also of other jurisdictions, where we see a massively increased interest by policymakers and citizens in really giving backwind to the cause of sustainability. And in the case of the European Union, this is translating in quite a number of legislative initiatives. And again, I'm not getting tired of saying this. I'm encouraged by how many people in our conversations talk to us and say, if we are early, there may be really an opportunity not to be missed. And where I would like to focus, what's coming up is the carbon border adjustment. That may be more of an issue of countries very deep in steel or other carbon-intense products. But what is relevant here is certainly the deforestation legislation, where we had a political compromise last year, and where within 18 months of the formal adoption, we will have to get ready to work with that. We also have legislation upcoming on corporate social sustainability and due diligence for that across all sectors and all countries. And we have then specific legislation in preparation on certain types of sustainability concerns or in certain sectors, like products made from forced labor, but we could also think of batteries or critical raw materials. There are a number of pieces of legislation that are still in preparation. Being here and having talked to you and in this context, I think the biggest interest would be in deforestation, that I would want to give you a bit more detail. Now we're starting from the point that we know this is an issue and it's something supported by science, that deforestation and forest degradation continue to take place at an alarming rate. That's a reality that we are facing. And we also know that deforestation and forest degradation are main drivers of climate change and of biodiversity loss, counting for about 11% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So that's hard science. Furthermore, deforestation and forest degradation have a dramatic impact on livelihoods of the most vulnerable people, including indigenous people who heavily rely on forest ecosystems and who are the best defenders of forests. Therefore, taking action against deforestation and forest degradation is crucial to attack and to tackle climate change, which we all identify as a challenge, and to protect the livelihoods of millions of people who directly depend on agricultural production and exports for their livelihood, but also indirectly rely on it. So we are aware that contribution, or that this is so important, and therefore the EU contributes massively to addressing the problem, knowing that because we are such a big consumer of products, we also have a big role in deforestation and forest degradation. And this is why we feel we have particular responsibility also to contribute ending deforestation and forest degradation. We can rely on the latest conference of the parties under the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC, where world leaders pledged to end and reverse deforestation by 2030, and where we took 2020 as a key year to look at. And that connects now to where we are here today, because we also know from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations that about 90% of forest deforestation is linked to expanding use of agricultural lands. And for that, that is the reason it's not just enough to only look at illegal deforestation, but also look at deforestation as such in all its forms, but also be realistic and choose a proper starting point. So what is the EU doing? We had legislation agreed in principle on 6 December, a legislation that aims to eliminate deforestation in all its forms. We focus now on 7 commodities, on soybean, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and some of their derived products. I know we had questions half a year ago, what is the list of tariff lines covered? Now we can give you the answer to that, we know that. The 7 commodities that we have there have to be chosen because through them the European Union has the biggest impact on deforestation. So that we chose. But it's something that may be reviewed, will be reviewed in the future and may be adapted. What the regulation requires from operators, and that is your opportunity, your challenge, but I'm pleased to hear also the opportunity here, to conduct due diligence on the supply chains, make sure that commodities and products in the scope are deforestation free and legal. And only such products will be then allowed to be exported. That's a requirement that applies to everyone. So it's equal opportunities for everyone. We're looking at deforestation after a cutoff date, which is 31st of December 2020. And that is aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where countries around the world committed to halting deforestation as from 2020. It's a relatively recent date, so we're focusing on future deforestation and forest degradation rather than about looking at the long past. The products that we look at should be geolocated, and we see again here we connect with innovation and science and technology and digital to be able to trace products back to the farm lot. And I fully appreciate there may be questions and we need to have that conversation ongoing. Geosatellite coverage should monitor that overall progress on forest protection and the evolution of land use. And indeed, your discussion today should be really helpful in getting us into what are the challenges, the opportunities, how to deal with that, questions you may have to the regulators in the EU that should then find their way into the guidelines that will have to be produced. A benchmarking system over the next 18 months will and should give us a classification of countries by risks in order to create incentives for the countries as countries to making progress in forest protection. Again, we want to base and will base this on scientific data. We still have to develop the projects giving us the information. And again, elements that industry has, people have on maybe also qualitative considerations that should be taken into account. We are takers for input and for discussion here to take the things with us. In the initial assessment, all countries will be on the same risk level, standard risk by default. The effects of the risk classification will be simplified due diligence in low risk, standard procedure in middle risk, higher risk-based spot checks for high-risk countries. There will be no ban for countries, there will be no ban for products. It's an opportunity for the operators to show how they comply to produce the information. Now there is cost, we heard about the cost today, but again, as the requirements are the same for everyone, the cost should be competition neutral to start from. It should be a factor to show higher competitiveness, readiness to comply. Summing up, yes, we see there is something coming up to you in Central America, in Guatemala, everyone around the world. We are very open about it. It's for the good of the planet, it's for all our good. And for those who are ready to comply, there's an opportunity. And we're willing and ready to support you in answering questions, to support you in working together. For this, we have now an adaptation period of 18 months, 24 months for small enterprises to introduce changes that are required. Our cooperation should focus in particular to the needs of smallholders and to address them. We're already now stepping up our cooperation to make sure that our partners can take the opportunities and reap the benefits that come from it. And we are willing and ready to also engage in specific dialogue. And in our case, it's a continuation of a dialogue we have already started, notably in using the opportunity in the platform we have in the trade agreement. I would end on leaving 2 or 3 questions here that may be also helpful to feed in our conversation. And number 1 is getting a clear mind about what the exposure is, what is newly deforested land that will fall under the regulation. What is already happening? What are all the good things that are already being done that should be given credit in our conversation? And on the technical rollouts, what are questions that need answers so that we can take up those questions and make sure they're going to be replied to either ad hoc or in the guidelines that the Commission is going to prepare on the rollout. So, my speech says, let's start a dialogue now. I would rather say, let's continue the conversation that has started, and has started very productively. Let's take advantage of this event today to deepen our dynamic EU-Central American trade and investment relationship, including the core part, the central part of sustainability in it, by using the potential and the opportunities of innovation-based solutions. Our agreement is built on common interest, on cooperative engagement, and on common values and interests. So, together, we will be able to tackle those global challenges ahead of us, and I'm very much looking forward to that process and to our future engagement based on our privileged relationship. Congratulations again on this fantastic event, very timely, bringing together so many important actors, and I wish you and all of us excellent discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Weigl. We're going to give 5 minutes for any questions from the public. Si tuvieran alguna pregunta para el señor Weigl, aprovechando que está de visita sobre el tema de comercio y desarrollo sostenible, o para alguno de los participantes anteriores, tenemos un espacio de unos minutos o algún comentario.
Sobre esa relación del análisis de un país y sobre todo porque en un país obviamente lo que manda es a hacer al respecto. Eso lo menciono porque obviamente ya está actualmente lo somos en los productivos. Entonces no sé al respecto, señor ministro, se puede comentar sobre todo lo que decía no sé qué al respecto, esas valoraciones que hay de un país y sobre todo la prospección que se tiene y contarlo en los nichos de mercado. Eso sería aprovechando los objetivos de las que hay. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. ¿Alguna otra pregunta antes de pasar a las respuestas? ¿O comentarios? ¿No? Bueno, señor ministro, yo creo que esta pregunta va para usted.
Nosotros como ministerio y particularmente como gobierno visualizamos nuestro esquema particular de producción, organizándonos en cadenas, identificamos los elementos fundamentales: posición de mercado, vulnerabilidad ambiental, oportunidades también que tenemos insertas, sobre todo a nivel de opciones que los consumidores deben dar. En tal sentido, siempre nos vamos a dirigir por un contexto legal comercial que permita a los actores efectivamente integrar elementos. Repetimos, como mencionamos al inicio, organización es fundamental. Las gremiales empresariales seguramente han sido un nicho y sobre todo un elemento de ocupación para nuestro país. Lo propio, nosotros estamos desarrollando la red del Consejo Nacional de Desarrollo Europeo, se pone adentro, se insertan las cadenas productivas y ahí es donde empezamos prácticamente a entretejer, porque tenemos oportunidades claves en el interior actualmente, tratando de impulsar zonas de producción, tenemos zonas de alta esencia, elementos de potencial de desarrollo. Hemos identificado zonas agrícolas interesantes y sobre todo, el tema de
conocer un poco las oportunidades que tenemos en esta cadena de valor en esos temas que hablamos con la Unión Europea. Me decía que no somos el mercado más grande del mundo, pero las normas que nosotros adoptamos actualmente las están adoptando el resto del mundo. Entonces miren qué estamos haciendo y tratan de cumplirlas, porque así es, a eso vamos. Con la suerte que en Guatemala muchos productores ya cumplimos esas normas. Muchos de los productores que actualmente estamos aquí, cuidamos el medio ambiente, cumplimos las normas, tenemos las licencias ambientales, trabajamos con tecnología, vemos de qué manera somos más eficientes, trabajamos con economías circulares, tenemos monitoreos de deforestación, en fin, hacemos muchísimas cosas que tal vez de lo que hemos pecado es de no publicarlas más, de que no haya más lugares en el mundo que nos conozcan y que sepan cómo trabajamos. Cuando hablan de palma y deforestación, en muchos casos están hablando de otras áreas del mundo que no necesariamente son Guatemala o Centroamérica, pero como no escuchan qué estamos haciendo aquí, entonces como no escuchan qué estamos haciendo aquí, solo escuchan lo que está sucediendo en otros lugares. Entonces tenemos que darnos a conocer y tenemos que ver qué productos tenemos, cómo trabajamos, qué cosas cumplimos, y como decía Ulrich, trabajar en confianza creo que es muy importante. El tema de certificarnos de que cumplimos cosas que ya venimos haciendo desde hace mucho tiempo muchas veces implica costos, y está bien, si son necesarios, pues, pero muchas veces el productor es el que más le está costando salir adelante y es el que tiene que cargarse bajo el hombro esos costos adicionales. Tal vez a eso me refería yo cuando hablaba de que pues las cadenas de valor tienen que ir distribuyendo entre ellas esa parte de ese costo, porque al final de cuentas trabajamos en confianza y ya que estamos cumpliendo, pues a menos de que haya algo que no esté bien, pues no vemos razones por las cuales tenga que haber una manera distinta de trabajar. Así que tenemos la suerte como país de que la mayoría de productores trabajamos como se debe de trabajar, cumplimos las normas que debemos de cumplir, y creo que eso nos va a facilitar mucho tener una buena relación y un buen comercio con Europa, y tal vez como consejo lo que nos falta es darnos a conocer un poquito más y mostrar cómo hacemos las cosas aquí en Guatemala. Gracias.
Bueno, yo sé que hay muchas otras preguntas, pero se nos fue el tiempo, así que we ran out of time. Sorry about this. Así que vamos a dar paso a nuestro siguiente panel. Muchas gracias.